Hello and welcome everyone. In this podcast, we're going to focus on what we can call bioenergetics. And what we mean by bioenergetics is the study of how energy is used in living cells or organisms. I'm going to begin these podcasts on bioenergetics with defining some terms associated with cellular energy. And then we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about the laws, the first two laws of thermodynamics. What they mean, how the cell uses them, and how they couple certain kinds of reactions. And then I'll close with an introduction to changes in free energy. What does that mean in relation to the spontaneity of cellular reactions? Now I want to talk about the problems of a living organism. It's not such a problem because at least we get to live, but it's a problem that has to be dealt with. Let's first look at this from the perspective of non-living matter. Things like dead animals or dead trees, they tend to move towards disorder. They break down, they decay. That's what they do. However, living matter may have a tendency to go to disorder, as we'll talk about in a little bit, but they somehow maintain and even gain order. To do this, these living organisms require energy and a source of atoms. It's interesting to think about that the atoms in my body now, most of them weren't around in my body 10 years ago. We constantly need this new source of atoms in order to maintain order. So let's give a working definition of energy. And we'll talk about energy later on in these podcasts and at other points in the semester. But we can think of energy as the capacity or power to do work. So up here, we need energy. We need the capacity or the power to maintain this order. So maintaining the order is the work. Let's define work more formally here. And work is often defined as the measure of energy transfer that occurs when an object is moved, typically by an external force. Let's break down work based on the cell, based on cellular work. And so there's different kinds of work that we can talk about. There's synthetic work. This is work that results in making new molecules. So any of the biosynthetic pathways that we'll talk about or have talked about, so the process of making proteins from amino acids, that would be synthetic work. Mechanical work. This could be the physical change in orientation or position of a cell. Within the cell, we can also think about something called concentration work, We'll talk about this more when we get into the discussions of membranes, but this is moving, or the movement of molecules across a membrane. Against the concentration gradient. So going from a low concentration to a high concentration would be an example of going against the concentration gradient, from low to high. We can also think of electrical work in the cell. And this is a great example of this is the movement of ions, so charged atoms, across a membrane against an electrochemical gradient. And then let's define heat. This is energy used to maintain temperature in homeotherms, or warm-blooded animals. And the last one I asked you to know was bioluminescence. And I ran out of room, but I'm going to draw it up here. And this is the capacity of some organisms, some living organisms, to generate light. Now I want to talk about this term here called metabolism. We can define metabolism as the sum of all chemical reactions that occur in cells of an organism. All these reactions that help do all the work that we talked about on the previous whiteboard. That's what metabolism is. You can think of metabolism as being a combination of two pathways: catabolic and anabolic pathways. We could also call catabolic pathways catabolism. So what these catabolic pathways will do is they will take food molecules and break them down. So catabolic breaks down larger structures into smaller ones. And so here let's write building blocks that can then be used to make larger molecules. These building blocks, as I just said, will then be used in anabolic pathways. We can call this anabolism. So in these anabolic pathways, they will be used to generate cellular molecules. It could be sugars, it could be amino acids, it could be nucleotides, it could be lipids that can then go on to make larger molecules, the macromolecule. I should also mention that in these catabolic pathways there is a loss of heat and it will produce energy. This energy is then coupled with these anabolic pathways to help take these building blocks into these cellular molecules. Okay, let's now look at a generic anabolic pathway. So let's say you're starting over here with the building blocks. And down here you want that cellular macromolecule. And so let's just go ahead and write an amino acid. How do you get there? Well, there are several steps in this process before it finally makes it to the amino acid. Now these steps can occur all on their own typically in this example here. But for them to occur with any kind of efficiency, for these to occur with any kind of efficiency, we will require enzymes. So write enzyme 1, enzyme 2, enzyme 3, and enzyme 4. Enzymes are either proteins or RNA molecules that take a substrate and produce a product. And they do it in such a way that is more energetically favorable. And we'll talk more about that for our next class. If you remember on the previous slide, I talked about how those catabolic reactions provided energy. And sometimes that energy can come in here at these steps here to help make these reactions more favorable.